Shalom Chaverim, I'm Steve Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. Very special broadcast today. Separation of church and state doesn't seem to apply to the Noahide laws. And listen, before I really get into this broadcast, I need to kind of share some things with you guys. I know there's a lot of people, we've been getting a lot of emails. What happened to the playlist of the Noahide laws? Where did it all go? Even on Patreon, all the things we've done there have disappeared. Well, not fully disappeared, but I need to let you know a few things here. Some things I can't really say, but this is one of the reasons why we desperately need your help in supporting what we're doing here. We are fighting against some very powerful entities that do not want what we are saying to be broadcast to the world. And so we're in a battle right now, and we've got to deal with that battle. We're going to get that battle won, and we're going to go back and we're going to take and rework the different videos that we had already up online. We will repair those videos as well, because once we get this battle situated out, we're going to fix the audio files where they've separated the audio files on our work there to where they match up. Another issue that we're dealing with. But we're also wanting to really tackle this issue in a way that does not even remotely appear anti-Semitic. Because as Jewish people ourselves, our own past, we're not anti-Semitic. We love our people. We want our people's eyes to be open to the identity of the Messiah, which we believe to be Yeshua. But we also believe strongly in freedom of religion. And we don't think that any one particular religion has a right to dominate world government view in order to suppress the other believers based on their ideology. But that doesn't put all Jews in the same boat, just like it doesn't put all Muslims in the same boat either. In other words, there is radical Islam. There is radical Talmudist. But not all Jews are radical. Even if you go and you look at the Talmud itself, there are writings in there where the rabbis disagree with one another. And there are rabbis that wrote in the Talmud that are far more radical than there are on the other rabbis. But the issue today that we look at and that we need to examine is that this separation of church and state that has always been in our Constitution of the United States is being subverted by a new power, by a new radical Talmudist lobby that is trying to press on the United States the 7 Noahide laws. And if you look at the 7 Noahide laws from an outset look, just at, okay, what are their basic sayings there? You know, you're not to, it's against idolatry, it's against eating the limb of a live animal, you're not to murder, etc. Those basic tenets of the just the surface look, they appear to mirror that of the 10 Commandments. But the problem is all the sub-laws that are being written as well about these Noahide laws, and of course their source. They are Talmudic. They are most notably written by Rambam, the Maimonides, part of the Mishnah of the Talmud that was written over 1,000 years ago. And there are some very radical Talmudists that are pushing those, and they have been placed into our Education Day bill of the United States, and it's been signed by every president since that of President George H.W. Bush. And this is what our battle is against. Our battle is that we believe that the actions that are being taken are against the Constitution of the United States. And that because of the interpretation of the laws, and where that interpretation is most often taken from some of the radical Talmudists, that it could place the Christian community in danger in the future by allowing this under our own laws here in the United States. So, therefore, we are opposed to it. And in fact, more and more, there are laws and bills being passed throughout the United States that instead of dealing with just anti-Semitism, which is hatred against Jewish people just because they're Jewish, they always take it a step further. Like in the Florida bill that just passed. And again, it's dealing with the education side, including state-run colleges and campuses, that the students are not allowed to even speak against the state of Israel. So if the state of Israel is obviously involved in crimes against humanity, these students who are old enough to vote, who have a right of freedom of speech, have been silenced in their constitutional rights because of another amendment that was unconstitutionally passed in the state of Florida. And this is going to be a trend unless people wake up and take a stand for our constitutional rights. And standing for your constitutional rights is not anti-Semitic. And again, as we state, we are not for violence of Jews or against synagogues of any kind whatsoever. We love our Jewish brothers and sisters as we love Christians and as we love Muslims. We may not agree with doctrinal issues on any of the others, but there again, even the same thing can be said about in Christianity. There's many different divisions and different opinions in Christianity as well. But that's what makes America great. It's a country of freedom. That's what we want to see it stay. So this is our battle. Our battle is not against the people of Israel or the Jewish people around the world, because we as well, being Jewish by descent and by birth, we have a heart's desire and a love for our people. And although we want to see them recognize the Messiah to be Yeshua, to be Jesus of Nazareth, we do not believe that you force this upon anybody. And neither do we want the Noahide laws that are Talmudic laws and not the 10 Commandments that Moses gave to be forced upon us. We believe the 10 Commandments of Moses based on what he wrote, and we accept those to our heart. Now, if someone wants to take idolatry and start to translate that as Christians are idolaters because they believe that Jesus Christ is the divine Son of God and should be put to death because of that, we oppose that idea. It's normally the interpretation that seems to get everybody into trouble. So, let's get started in this. Of course, we do have our warning about 17 U.S.C. 107, Section 107, the limitations of exclusive rights of the Fair Use Act there. Just so those that are watching will know that this is called a fair use and is allowed for the purpose of criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody, which doesn't infringe on copyright under 17 U.S.C. 107. So get right into this here. Now this on this website right here, Congress.gov, this is where the very bill that was passed, that was submitted there in honor of Rabbi Menachem Schneerson's birthday, how this crept into our own Congress here in the United States and then was actually signed by President H.W. Bush. So I wanted to read this to you just a little bit. HJ Resolution 104 to designate March the 26th, 1991 as Education Day USA. Now it's interesting because it's called Education Day USA, and you have to wonder, what do the 7 Noahide laws have to do with Education Day? We would expect this to be something about schools or something. Honoring teachers, you might even think. Well, it only honors only one teacher, and that is Rabbi Menachem Schneerson of the Chabad Blvd organization, whom many of the Chabad Jews believe to have been the Messiah. But anyway, it goes on to say, to designate March the 26th, 1991 as Education Day USA, whereas Congress recognized the historical tradition of ethical values and principles, which are the basis of civilized society and upon which our great nation was founded. Whereas these ethical values and principles have been the bedrock of society from the dawn of civilization when they were known as the 7 Noahide laws. You see that for yourself right there? See, this is from the Congress.gov, from their website, HJ Resolution 104, I think it's -12 if you want to be more specific, to designate March 26, 1991 as Education Day USA. And of course, they tell you that whereas these ethical values and principles have been the bedrock of society from the dawn of civilization, where they were known as the 7 Noahide laws. So much for separation of church and state. Well, I guess it's okay, because The Founding Fathers didn't want Catholicism to rule the United States as it was doing all across Europe. So that's why we put that in there. But no one never anticipated that we would have radical Talmudism bringing in a Talmudic law and saying that our nation is now being founded on Talmudic laws. No, I didn't anticipate that one either, right? So anyway, whereas without these ethical values and principles, the edifice of civilization stands in serious peril of returning to chaos. That's important right there as well. Not only are they saying that these 7 Noahide laws are the bedrock of civilization, but having them placed in the educational law system there is the principles to edify so the civilization stands in serious peril of returning to chaos. In other words, if they don't put these laws and make them part of the law of the land, we could return to chaos. Whereas society is profoundly concerned with the recent weakening of these principles that has resulted in crises that beleaguer and threaten the fabric of civilized society. Do you realize what Congress did here, and what the Senate passed, and what the President H.W. Bush signed is basically saying without the 7 Noahide laws put into law in the United States, it becomes a national crisis. That's basically what they're saying. I mean, look at what they said. Stands in serious peril of returning to chaos. That's a national crisis for America. So the 7 Noahide laws are necessity to avoid a national crisis is really what it comes down to. Let's continue on. Whereas the justified preoccupation with these crises must not let the citizens of this nation lose sight of their responsibility to transmit these historical ethical values from our distinguished past to the generations of the future. That's why they're under Education Day. Same thing in Florida, put under educational laws. It almost makes you wonder if they're going to do away with the older generation and start afresh anew. Whereas the Lubavitch movement has fostered and promoted these ethical values and principles throughout the world. Did you notice that right there in the blue? Throughout the world. Who did it? The Chabad Lubavitch movement. Okay? And again, doesn't mean that everybody that's in the Chabad group are bad people, but there is radicalism that is on the rise. Whereas Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, leader of the Lubavitch movement, is universally respected and revered, and his 89th birthday falls on March 26, 1991. Whereas, in tribute to this great spiritual leader, the Rebbe, this has his 90th year, will be seen as one of education and giving. The year in which we turn to education and charity to return the world to the moral and ethical values contained in the 7 Noahide laws. Return the world, which we turn to educate. Are you serious? To return the world? Return the world to moral and ethical values contained in the 7 Noahide laws. You know, maybe had they not have all these sub-laws in there that the radical Talmudists have put in there, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. But then again, why do you have to throw the 10 Commandments out? Why couldn't we keep the 10 Commandments? Do you think that these 7 Noahide laws do more than the 10 Commandments? Well, you might get rid of a radical group that they're what they consider to be a radical group, the Christians that believe that Jesus is Messiah, and that might help the cause. Whereas this will be reflected in the International Scroll of Honor signed by the President of the United States and other heads of state. Now therefore be it. All right, now I just kind of stopped right there. Notice, it wasn't just the President, but other heads of state. That's other country leaders as well. Now, as you can see right here, I have on the screen for you here, this is President Donald J. Trump signing once again in, and that's the bad thing. It'd be one thing if they just signed it back when H.W. Bush was in office. All right, that was bad enough, but every year there's a recommitment, a reaffirmation of these 7 Noahide laws. And President Trump, surrounded by Chabad Lubavitcher rabbis, are all there to make sure that the president continues in the tradition of the radical side of Talmudism and signs this legislation once again. Now, I find it very fascinating when I saw that image of President Trump surrounded by these rabbis here knowing that the law of idolatry that is in these 7 Noahide laws, which I must stress are not biblical. Nowhere in the Bible do we have 7 Noahide laws. When they cite it, they cite Genesis chapter 9, I believe it is, where Noah, when his 7 sons, they come out, and Noah starts giving the commandment of not to kill. And then they interpret his words about, okay, you got to drain the blood out of the animal before you can eat the animal. All right? That's just an interpretation. Here, not quite worded that way. But the thing is, though, look at the picture. President Trump basically represents Romanism of today, the Western society. He represents what's supposed to be America, a Christian nation, right? He's surrounded by Orthodox Jews from the Chabad Lubavitch organization specifically, okay? But if we go back in time, there was another Western civilization, a Roman leader. In fact, I wish I could have found the picture of Trump and Mike Pence together. It would have made it even more profound. And he is also, Pontius Pilate, is surrounded by what? Orthodox rabbis. To persuade him that Yeshua is a radical man and must be put to death. And whether Donald Trump knows it or not, according to Rambam, the very man that includes the Noahide laws in his Law of the Kings, the Mishnah, the Talmud that he writes, Maimonides, the sub-law of idolatry are those that proclaim worship to another person other than Yehovah. The Tetragrammaton Yod-He-Vav-He, the divine name of God himself, that if you put Jesus as divine, you are guilty of idolatry. And according to Rambam's own writings on these sub-laws for the 7 Noahide laws, it is a punishment under the Talmud. It's not a matter of radical Talmud there. That's just whoever believes who in the Talmud. Because not all rabbis of the Talmud believe that there should be 2 different sets of laws for the people. There shouldn't be a Noahide law for the Gentiles and the 10 Commandments for the Jews. Rashi actually disagreed with him. But unfortunately, the radical Talmudists, many of which are part of the Chabad movement, are all about standing with Rambam and not Rashi's interpretation. So they're pushing the 7 Noahide laws. And people that think that this is no big deal, oh, it's just ended up an education day. Then why do we have to have a ceremony every year signing this? Why is it not just in the United States, but the Philippines, Europe, many of the nations there, all over the world, these are being lifted up as some kind of great thing. And again, as I say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Nothing has changed, only the time. A Roman leader surrounded by radical Talmudists. Because believe me, the Jews there that hated Jesus was not all of Judaism. Even there were Jews that did not believe that Yeshua was the Messiah, but they still were not out there wanting his death. And there were many that had to be persuaded by radicalism to cry out for his blood. So I just thought that was interesting. Only time has changed. And that cry for a law to be passed or to be enacted or to be, in this case here, they're not there requesting him to pass anything. It's already been done. But it places, I know there are some that believe, there are some very well-known Christian ministers out there that say there's nothing to it, it doesn't matter, okay, it's just, all right, it's there, but it's no big deal. If it's not a big deal, then why put it in there in the first place? As my wife would often say, if you put Sharia law under an education thing, you're not really making it a law of the land. We just include it under an education part of the law there. And, well, it's only going to be for the Muslims of America. And every year, the clerics from the Muslim community were to come and join up with the President of the United States and have him to re-sign the dedication for maybe some famous Muslim guy, and that they're honoring as Education Day the Sharia laws. I think every Christian in this country would go ballistic. And a lot of people that are not Christians would go ballistic. But because we have some radical Talmudists that do it, and because the evangelical Christians have been so took in by Israel becoming a nation. And I'll tell you something. I realized the way Israel became a nation, as far as in 1948, there was a lot of evil that took place. But Israel really started becoming a nation under the Ottoman Empire when the Ottoman Empire were allowing Jews to return home and to purchase land. They came in the way Abraham did. In 1948, when Israel became a nation, is all about bloodshed. But nonetheless, there is a remnant there today that have come home to see the coming of the Messiah. And yes, many of those may be Talmudists as well. They might be Kabbalists as well. But they have a genuine heart. All they want to do is see the Messiah. And they don't care who he is. They don't have an agenda to try to push this way or push that way. They could be secular Jews. They could be Orthodox. Doesn't make any difference. They're not out there trying to take the rest of the world and push on the rest of the world 7 Noahide laws and to make them obey the laws. There's no agenda. They just want to be free. And they're Jews that have went through the persecution of the Holocaust, and they want to be free. In fact, there are many Jews that went through the persecution of the Holocaust that have, many of them have no clue that the Zionists themselves were helping to create that problem. To make it worse, maybe I should say it that way. They didn't do the Holocaust per se, but, and we've gone into that many times before. All right, so let's move on. But you know, here's what's interesting though. This is from a movie about Jesus and everything. The picture is supposed to be the image of Pilate, Pilate's wife. And Pilate's wife, she represents the true believers who tried to warn the president, in this case here in modern times, tries to warn Pilate. I've suffered many things in a dream this very night, in a vision, about as she calls Jesus, what? A just man. She says, have nothing to do with it. And he really didn't want to have anything to do with it. Maybe Trump's the same way. I don't know. Maybe other presidents, maybe Obama, maybe Clinton, maybe who knows. I don't know their hearts per se, but maybe they really didn't want to have anything to do with this. Because they know, if they have any idea at all, they probably know that under the Talmudic law, that it means the putting to death of the believers if it's ever fully put into force. And there's a great movement already. You don't have to take my word for it. Look it up online. There is a great movement amongst the elite leaders of Israel to replace the United Nations with the Sanhedrin Council. I mean, we are seeing, like never before in the history of humanity, we are seeing the same stage that was set 2,000 years ago when Jesus was being put on trial. We're seeing that same stage set again today. When he was being put on trial, there was a Sanhedrin court. There were the 70 courts there. The Romans were also involved in power 2,000 years ago. This Nostra Aetate that was signed some over 50 years ago, like 53 years ago, that was reaffirmed on the 50th anniversary with the World Jewish Congress, was a major ordeal there. Part of that Nostra Aetate was to bring back together the Jews and the Romans once again, in this case here the Roman Catholic Church, to reunite them. And of course they say in there that, you know, the Jews were not responsible for the death of Jesus. Well, in a way they weren't, you know, I'll agree with that. They didn't drive the nails in per se, but they condemned him to death. Pilate didn't want to condemn him to death. And I think it's the same way today. But the problem is, just like it was 2,000 years ago, it's at a time where it's almost too late to change it now. The power that was exercised by the radical Talmudists of 2,000 years ago, of the oral law, that held the oral law higher, had gotten so much momentum that when they were ready, what did they do? They even blamed Yeshua and his followers for trying to overthrow the government, for insurrection. What are they doing today? What is happening amongst the apologists for the radical Talmudists and the radical Talmudists of today? They're saying that what we're trying to warn the people about, that we oppose the 7 Noahide laws in the Constitution of the United States, that it's not constitutional, and that these laws that are being passed that are impinging on the free speech of our Constitution here in the United States, that we are going to create the problem. That we are, just like it was in the days of Jesus, the insurrection, that you have to put them down because they're going to cause a problem and the people will rile up. Just the opposite. Just like with Yeshua, we beg the people, be peaceful with people, show love and kindness. No matter how radical this may get, always show the love of Christ. When they come to take him prisoner, Peter pulls his sword. He cuts off the ear of the high priest, which is really symbolic if you think about it. It shows that they had no hearing. They did not have ears to hear with at that time. But there's coming a day where Christ will heal the ear, and they will once again have the ability to hear. That will be those that wanted to hear but didn't have the ability at that time. That's why I always say to people, no matter we oppose it, we have to oppose it because it is our duty as American citizens to stand for our constitutional rights that we have. We are not against, even the radical Talmudists, I'm not against the radical Talmudists as far as people. If you believe this for your community and you live by this for your community, okay. But don't force this upon the Christian world. And I'm ashamed at ministers that don't have enough spiritual insight to see what's happening. You can't see the stage being set like it was 2,000 years ago. You're blind to it. Instead of standing for Israel like it was 2,000 years ago and standing for those believers that are persecuted. I have a dear friend. He converted to, not because I don't like to even call it converted. He had Christ come to him and he became a believer that Yeshua was the Messiah. But something didn't go right one day. And his own wife was thrown in prison, threatened and everything else. I'm not at liberty to go into that story, but I can tell you one thing. It would have shocked any believer to the core to see that the state of Israel, certain members of the state of Israel would allow this type of treatment to a believer. But it happens on a daily basis. Many of the believers, you want to support Israel, do like it was 2,000 years ago. Support those that followed Yeshua. Pray for the state of Israel. Pray for the people that don't have their eyes open, but don't do evil to them. But instead, what's happening in the churches today? They support the secular side, the very side that is persecuting the believers of Yeshua. Instead, you support them instead of supporting the believers. You got it totally flipped around the other way. Well, I guess maybe I should realize that's the way it is. It's a Roman system. You have a Roman version of Christianity. We have radical evangelicals that don't seem to have eyes to recognize the Word of Almighty God. Instead, you want to take people all back into the old ways. What a mess. This is from Jewish Institute for Global Awareness. Government leaders encourage adherence to the 7 Noahide laws. So if you don't think this is not real, read what it says. The universality of these principles in global import was recognized in 1982 by President Ronald Reagan when he spoke to the eternal validity of the 7 Noahide laws. Eternal validity? By the way, Jewish Institute for Global Awareness is a Jewish website. Okay? As a moral code for all us, regardless of religious faith, proclamation of the National Day of Reflection, April 4th, 1982. So even before it came into under Rabbi Menachem Schneerson's Education Day USA, they were already being promoted by President Ronald Reagan in 82. 7 years later, in 1989, President H.W. Bush only proclaimed that these biblical values are the foundation for civilized society. But he also recognized that a society that fails to recognize to adhere to them cannot endure. Wow. He understood how these principles of moral and ethical conduct that have formed the basis of civilization comes to us in part from the centuries-old 7 Noahide laws. In doing so, he noted their origins, and he quote, unquote, this is H.W. Bush, president, former president. The Noahide laws are actually 7 commandments given to man by God as recorded in the Old Testament. They're not in the Old Testament. Both the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States Congress 1991 on bipartisan basis further recognize how this historical tradition of ethical values and principles upon which our great nation was founded have been bedrock of society from the dawn of civilization when they were known as the 7 Noahide laws. The American Congress understood how the most recent weakening of these principles has resulted in crises that beleaguer and threaten the fabric of civilized society. So now they make it a national crisis if you don't have them. Well, if they mirror the 10 Commandments and were in this so-called national crisis, then the 7 Noahide laws would not make any difference unless radical Talmudists can have the interpretation by the sub-laws that are written not only in the Talmud, but as they write more sub-laws of the enforcement of these laws. That's how they can change it. But it's not for the good of humanity, it's only to silence those that don't agree with what they believe. It is, in essence, uniting not church and state, but radical Talmudism and state. Because we don't have that in our Constitution, so therefore you could get away with it, probably. Now, you know, this way gets me too. H.W. Bush, did he never read a Bible or something? The guy doesn't know his own Bible. He just blabs out they're part of the Bible when they're not. Thus, they warned us that without these ethical values and principles, the edifice of civilization stands in serious peril of returning to chaos. Public Law 102-14 of the 102nd Congress, First Session, H-Day, Resolution 104. Is there something about, people go, it's not a law, it's not a law. Okay, then why is it called Public Law 102-14? If it's not a law, then why did you call it a law? If it's just a resolution, why did it get called a law? Other world leaders have joined the call for further observance and knowledge of these laws. Examples, only examples, not limited to, Herman van Rompuy, President of the European Union. That covers all the European nations. July 2014, that he seeks greater dissemination of the universal laws known as the Noahide laws, and Major General Michael Jeffrey, Governor General of Australia, lamenting family breakdowns and drug and alcohol abuse in modern society in 2008, letter wrote that he believed that observing the fundamental values of the Noahide laws can be an antidote to such ills of society. The seven Noahide laws don't speak about anything about drug and alcohol abuse. I'm sorry, it must be one of those sub-laws. The hundreds of sub-laws that are being written for the Noahide laws that they'll be able to crack down on. I'm sorry, I missed it. Maybe my head was out to lunch. Now, this article here is from Dr. Lorraine Day's website. Dr. Lorraine Day, she's been on Israeli News Live. Some of her messages that we've had are on private right now. Again, we are working on these things in the background, and I cannot stress to you enough the help we're going to need. We are hiring attorneys to protect our freedom of speech in this nation. And so, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on, all right? Anyway, Dr. Lorraine Day is a trauma surgeon. It was her husband, former Congressman Bill Dannemeyer. He was one of the signatories on here, but he did not present the bill. And maybe I stand corrected on this. He had no idea when these so-called 7 Noahide laws were being introduced that there were 7 Noahide laws in there. They didn't know anything until this was already signed. All right? So I stand corrected. I don't think he actually signed it per se. But let me read to you a little bit about this. Your U.S. government can, because Bill Dannemeyer, former Congressman Dannemeyer, he actually wrote this. It was published on his wife's website in defense of his not knowing what they were doing. Your U.S. government can now legally kill Christians for the crime of worshiping Jesus Christ. A diabolic deception has been perpetrated on the American people by their own leaders, senators and congressmen who have sold their soul to the devil on March 5th, 1991 in the House of Representatives on March 7th, 1991 in the U.S. Senate without any knowledge or input by the people of the United States. U.S. senators and congressmen passed a law that is so outrageous and frankly unconstitutional that it forces the American people to bound by a set of monstrous rules called the Noahide laws. Rules that make the belief in Jesus Christ a crime punishable by decapitation by guillotine. March 20th, 1991, President George H.W. Bush, a supposed Christian, signed the bill into law. Jana notes President George H.W. Bush follows in his father's footsteps. Okay? Now, I'm going to read to you only the yellow parts here. Still under the same article by Dr. Day on her website. Resolution was introduced designating March 26, 1991 as Education Day USA. It was purposely given this name to deceive the American people. It was in fact double deception because not only did the resolution have nothing to do with education, it was also deceptively billed as a vehicle for recognizing the 89th birthday of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. But in truth, the resolution was nothing less than a secret, underhanded plot to control the American people by the Noahide laws. Okay? Subterfuge for the elimination of Christianity and the elimination of Christians and enslavement of all remaining Gentiles. The resolution, second paragraph, first introduced by Minority Leader Republican Robert H. Mitchell of Illinois, was referred to the House Post Office and Civil Service Committee in early March 1991. 225 members of the House signed on as co-sponsors for this resolution, but it is highly doubtful they were given the full text of the document. They were probably told only that it was a resolution in honor of Rabbi Schneerson's birthday. Most likely they had no knowledge that the treacherous Noahide laws were a silent attachment. All right, now, he notes on here, and I don't have it in yellow, I put it right here in white so you could see it easier. I was not one of the co-sponsors. That's Congressman Bill Dannemeyer. He was not one of those sponsors. The committee referred to this resolution to the House for a vote March 5th, 1991, but here is where the real treachery begins. The record states that the House of Representatives passed this resolution by unanimous consent. But what the average American does not know is that unanimous consent is a euphemism for getting a bill passed under the radar without almost no one present to vote and with no record of who voted or how they voted. So it's done in secret. And to put it quite bluntly, it did pass. And what did they have on there? Let me just get to the Congressman here. Okay, let's see. One day, I want to start right down here. One day this resolution was passed. The entire membership of the House of Representatives had already been dismissed after having been told that the day's work, including all the voting, was over. We could all go home. It was then, after virtually all members had left, that the traitorous authors of this resolution brought it up for a vote on the House floor. With only 4 hand-picked members present, it was then deceitfully passed by unanimous consent. On March 5th, 1991, by voice vote with almost no one, and there was no record made of their names or how they voted. 2 days later, March 7, 1991, the U.S. Senate passed the resolution by voice vote. Also, with no record vote, on March 20, 1991, it was signed by President H.W. Bush and became Public Law 102-14. So it was done very stealthily. All right? Now, let's take a look at some more. And again, this particular article on Schneerson Center for Jewish Life, it's under schneersoncenter.org as the website itself. So you could look it up if you would like to. You'd have to type in some of the keywords. The Gentiles on the time of Mashiach. I like this article for one reason. This article actually shows the balance. In other words, although I don't agree with everything Rashi says, who is also a writer of the Mishnah, and like Rambam, Maimonides, part of the Talmud is, his works attributed to the part of the Talmud as well. And they both come from the same time period. But these two men disagreed with one another on the Noahide laws. Now Rashi writes a lot of things that are really far out as well, that would seem very much like radical Talmudism. But on this subject here of the Messianic age, he has more of a neutral stance. That's why I say, you can't lump all Jews in the same boat just because they're Orthodox. It just so happens though that many of the Chabad movement, and I only say many, it's not all Chabad Jews either, so it's not fair to lump the Chabad groups into this. All right? But the radical Talmudists that are in the Chabad movement, they hold to Maimonides or Rambam's interpretation. So let's read it. All right, we're going to read this part down here. All right? Because the question is asked, what will be the status of the Gentile nations when Mashiach comes? The answer, they will not necessarily convert to Judaism, but all will follow the Noahide code. The answer comes from the radical Talmudist. The radical Talmudist, which Schneerson is the one giving, it's his website, he is taking the radical view of Rambam, and he's not taking, I was making sure I had the microphones on, so, you know, I've done that before, you start recording and you forget to turn the sound on. All right, anyway, but he also, at least he has the decency to put on there what Rashi thought about it. All right? So the Talmud states that with the future redemption, all non-Jews will return to God with complete teshuvah. As the verse states, I will transform all nations to a pure language that all of them will call on the name of God and worship Him of one accord. Zephaniah 3:9. He says, Rashi comments, right here where it starts in yellow. It is understood that there will be no difference among God's servants. Israel and the nations will all serve God in the same manner with all the mitzvot. In other words, all the laws, all the commandments. Now, in Rashi's mind, I'm sure he believes that's all the alleged 613 commandments or mitzvot that there is. I would like to think that maybe he was thinking of only the 10 commandments. So in that way, Rashi believes too that Christians will eventually one day keep Sabbath as well. All right? So I can appreciate Rashi's statement on this particular issue. But the answer has already been given to you by Schneerson. They will not necessarily convert to Judaism, but all will follow the Noahide code. So he takes Rambam, the last paragraph. However, Maimonides disagrees with this view. Although he writes that all non-Jews will return and do teshuvah, he does not interpret this to mean that they will convert to Judaism. The non-Jews will all commit to fulfilling the 7 Noahide laws that were commanded to all mankind. So, there comes the radicalism right there. Now, I'm going to play for you a section here, and this is from Rabbi Levi Shem Tov. He's a Chabad emissary in Washington, D.C., rabbi to ambassadors, presidents, potentates, shares first-hand accounts on how the Rebbe's teachings have influenced the world's most powerful men and women, recorded on the occasion of the 17th anniversary of the Rebbe's passing. And you know, when I listen to him, you really got to listen to the whole video, all right? And I'll put that in the description below for you guys. But when you listen to Mr. Shem Tov and what he says here, if you go through the whole video, he's always quoting Rabbi Schneerson. Rabbi Schneerson said this. Rabbi Schneerson said that. You know, there's some so-called Christian faiths out there that's what they do. They quote their leaders. So-and-so said this. So-and-so said that. Even the Jehovah's Witness organization, the elders have said this. The elders say that. Whatever the elders say. You know, Yeshua will share his glory with no man. He won't share it with your leader. He won't share it with the Orthodox community's leader. That belongs to him and him alone. And this is one reason why the 7 Noahide laws can help silence those believers of Yeshua that will never give up Yeshua as the divine Son of God. They'll never forsake him. And they can't have that. That's not all Judaism either. That's those radical Talmudists. They can't have that because they have really are impressing on world leaders to bring about this change. Listen carefully, especially to the last few minutes when he mentions how many nations, how many countries the movement affects around the world. Listen to what he has to say.
She says the Supreme Court of the United States. It seemed odd to me that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court would come to this barber in DuPont Circle, but he did. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the limousine pulls up and out walks the Chief Justice, William Rehnquist, the judge presiding over the highest court in the land, coming to get his hair cut. The barber's very excited, and as soon as the Chief Justice walks in, he quickly makes an introduction. He says, this is the rabbi, this is the Chief Justice. He introduces us one to the other. So I don't know how it works here in the Valley, but in Washington, D.C., you make your point very quickly, or you don't get to make it at all. So therefore, I have been trained, and in my experiences, I have learned that I need to make a point very quickly sometimes. So I said, Mr. Chief Justice, it's an honor to meet you. I just want you to know that by presiding over a court of justice, you are upholding one of the main principles of the 7 Noahide laws, which is something very sanctified, notwithstanding your particular legal position. Meaning to say that whether I feel you're right or you're wrong, just the fact that this institution of justice is being upheld is a great precept of the 7 Noahide laws, and I want you to know that it's something sanctified from my perspective. So the judge says, the justice says, I appreciate that very much. I'll especially remember it the next time I author the dissenting opinion. Put on my jacket to leave, and the Chief Justice waves me over to the chair right next to his, and he says, those 7 laws, by whom were they given and when? And he motions to me to sit down, and of course, anyone in the United States, when the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States tells you to do something, you do it. Sat down, and we had a whole discussion. He was basically bald, so his haircut didn't take all that long. But say for 15 or 20 minutes, we had a discussion about the 7 Noahide laws and about how whatever you do, even sitting on a court, if you do it for the right purpose, it can become divine. After our discussion, he gets up to leave, I get up to leave, and I say, well, Mr. Chief Justice, this has been a wonderful discussion. I hope you have a wonderful day. To which he replies, a wonderful day. Now I want to have a divine day. A few weeks later, I go back for my next haircut, and the barber tells me that Chief Justice had just been in a few days before, was asking where the material was that I was supposed to send him about the 7 Noahide laws as a follow-up. And why do I tell you this story? I tell you this story because someone of his stature, recognizing through words that the Rebbe said, which I internalized and then conveyed, agreed with the idea to the point that he mentioned it a few weeks later on his own, that what you do in life can become divine if you do it for the appropriate purpose. Let me give you another idea.
Only a few more seconds.
To the diplomatic world. And just to give you a background, my interaction with the diplomatic world is very simple. We in Chabad Lubavitch operate in some 82 countries, with satellite operations in another 20 or so more. And as such, different issues arise that necessitate our functioning and interacting with diplomats from many countries. You never know where there's going to be a problem or a need.
Did you notice that? The Chabad Lubavitch organization of the Orthodox Jews operates in 82 countries, 20 or so more countries as well. And he goes into there, all the different diplomats, presidents, kings, in fact, that he speaks to. And of course, at the tenet of those conversations is to engage the 7 Noahide laws upon all of humanity. All right? Now, if we have 10 commandments, what need do we have of 7 Noahide laws? But there are some, and I don't want to say that all Jews necessarily are radical that have this thought. There are some of the Orthodox community that believe that there should be one set of laws for those that are non-Jews and then another set of laws that are just for the Jewish people. That doesn't necessarily translate that it makes them radical because they believe that. But what makes the radical idea is when you know that you're citing a Talmudic law that is not biblical, but you have to understand from the thinking of Orthodox Judaism, many Orthodox Jews believe that the oral law, which would be the Talmud, is equivalent to that of the written law of Moses. That it's just as important and just as much to be adhered to. Now, we could argue that's radical, we could argue that's not radical. You could argue that there's good points in the Talmud, and you could argue there's points in the Talmud that are clearly would be very radical in many people's views. But the issue that we take up with this is because we see the encroachment upon the civil rights as well as freedom of speech, which is part of a civil right, but the civil rights of humanity of those that are non-Jews by the interpretation specifically targeting idolatry that would place many Christians in a position of possibly losing their lives in a not so distant future if this continues to move in the direction it's going in now. There are many videos that we could play. There are many articles we could show you that there are a very well number of radicalized thinking that quote over and over and over Rambam of Maimonides. You can see volumes of books that have been written, specifically prayer books written for Christians, as they begin to, almost as if the whole idea of Christianity has to be rewritten. If you look at the Nostra Aetate and you read the document, you will find out in the Nostra Aetate that even Catholicism is being redefined. Yeshua and his position as the divine Son of God, to me as he is God manifested in human flesh, is being subverted. The beliefs of Christianity are being rewritten. And it starts with the Nostra Aetate and the Vatican itself. But it's not fair to put all the blame on Catholicism or as far as Catholic people either. Just like it's not right to put all the blame on Jews for radicalization of Talmudic ideas. Because you have to understand what has gone on inside the Catholic Church and how we got here in the first place. And we'll get into that. First, let's look at Haaretz. This is an opinion piece called The Messianic Zionist Religion Whose Believers Worship Judaism But Can't Practice It. And that's a very interesting title of an article on Haaretz, because they're talking about evangelicals and even some of the Hebrew Roots movement that are not Jews, they are Gentiles, but they love Israel. They want to explore the roots of Judaism, but forgetting about the prophets and what the prophets wrote or what Moses wrote, but instead they're wanting to go under Talmudic law, and they have no idea this is what they're doing. But anyway, the article is interesting. The Noahide Project, which has Israeli governmental and rabbinical support. This is Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper, says here, the Noahide Project, which has Israeli governmental and rabbinical support, is trying to proselytize members of remote communities just as long as they don't call themselves Jews, right? Wow. Proselyting them. Bringing them in under this covenant of Noahide covenant. Let's read some of the segments of this article. But who are these Noahides? They are members of a new religion, subordinate to Judaism, founded by rabbis from Israel, mainly from Chabad and religious Zionist movement. So it's not just Steve. It's not what my wife has said in previous videos in our Steve and Jana chats, which we'll continue on with our chats. We're just dealing with some other issues, as I said before. This is Haaretz. And they're saying there that it is mainly from Chabad and other religious Zionists. And again, maybe not all of them believe the radical side, the Rambam writes, but many of them do. Rabbi Tovia Singer has said publicly, Christians that believe that Jesus is divine and worship Him and pray to Him, they are idolaters. Tovia Singer is a Talmudist. I don't think that Tovia necessarily believes or condones putting people to death. I don't think that he thinks that way. But the thing is, if you really believe Rambam, or do you believe what he said, or do you don't believe what he says? I don't know. I don't know the issue. I can't say who's who in this. But the issue is they put it in our constitutional laws. All right? According to the World Center, there are dozens of Noahide communities across the world with more than 20,000 believers. They're already forsaking Yeshua as the Messiah. That's a hefty number given that the religion was only founded at the beginning of the decade. Small Noahide communities exist in various countries, with the largest one in the Philippines. Yeah, they're already cracking down over there. Cooperation between Israel and the Philippines is constantly growing, and this week reached new heights with the visit to Israel. I'm only going to read the yellow part, right? Rodrigo Duterte was the, you see him in the news all the time. He's very vocal. There are 4 Chabad centers in the country. In addition to assisting Jews, they support 10 Noahide houses of prayer. The Hasidic emissaries view the Philippines community as a model for Noahide communities in other countries. A group from the community was brought to Israel 2 years ago, and its members met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He has also sent his greetings to all the communities worldwide. Well, they tell you right there in the very beginning that what? Which Israeli governmental and rabbinical support. So you know Netanyahu is for Noahide laws. And yet we have evangelicals that flock and sing the praises of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Listen, I was there with you at one time. I love Netanyahu. I never believed that he would ever work, though. I've said it publicly from the very beginning. As much as I loved the man at one time and I appreciated him at one time, not knowing, and I say that because I was blind to his real purpose. But at one time I was blinded as well in believing that he was for the good of the country. I had no idea that it was only to do the wars to be able to bring about prophecy the way they see it. So I don't fault you. I'm only asking you to wake up. You cannot be the Prime Minister of Israel and it be a holy nation in the return of the Jewish people to our homeland, which I believe is biblical. We were to return. There is a remnant, as Paul said, that will recognize that Yeshua indeed is the Mashiach. But the thing is there are some radical groups that are taking advantage of the return home as the Bible prophesied, and they're using the evangelical community to further an agenda for world domination instead. This is where your New World Order is going to be headquarters. It's right there. So now you know what's going on. Now the Nostra Aetate. I used to blast this all the time. But you know where the big problem was? I never read the entire document. Maybe had I read the entire document, I would have been appalled, and maybe we could have picked up on this sooner, and perhaps maybe we could have got the Christians to wake up to fight against this. And I still say that we should write our congressmen, write your senators. We should challenge the constitutionality of the 7 Noahide laws being placed as public law 104-12. Peaceful means we should go about this to have this removed. And to contact congressmen and senators and tell them, do not just sign every anti-Semitic law that comes across your desk without thoroughly reading and recognizing in there, have they slipped in other provisions such as, oh, well, you can do all the crimes you want against the Palestinians because it doesn't matter after all, so you can't speak against the state of Israel. The latest one they have out will stop you from speaking against the state of Israel, will not allow you to speak against the Rothschilds as far as the controlling the world economic system. It will not allow you to speak against the Twin Towers as being an inside job that both Israel and elites of the United States, not all the Israelis by the mind you, but certain radical elements in Israel were involved in bringing down the Twin Towers to force the United States into the wars in the Middle East. It'll be a crime punishable by prison for saying those things. That's why we don't have much time. And we will, in the very near future, start making things available for you. We're working on that as hard as we can go to get information in your hands as well, so you have it when we can't speak here any longer. Anyway, let me read to you a couple of sections. This is further down in Nostra Aetate. So if you look up Nostra Aetate, you can see this on their website, on the Catholic Vatican website. But this is quite a ways down in there. Let's go to section 11. In company with the prophets and the same apostles, the church awaits that day, known to God alone, on which all peoples will address the Lord in a single voice and serve him shoulder to shoulder. Now they put Psalm 3:9. That's Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9. And again, he's quoting the very scriptures the Noahides are using, and that also that they're bringing them together under the umbrella of you have to convert to Noahidism. Since the spiritual patrimony common to Christians and Jews is thus so great, the Sacred Synod wants to foster and recommend that mutual understanding and respect, which is the fruit, above all, of biblical and theological studies as well as fraternal dialogues. True, the Jewish authorities and those who followed their leader pressed for the death of Christ. Still, what happened in his passion cannot be charged against all Jews without distinction then alive, nor against the Jews today. Now, I agree with that one part there. Jewish people all over the world today, they're not responsible for what happened 2,000 years ago. All right? We cannot hold them accountable. It's not right to do. We're supposed to be a light of the world to lead them to Christ. But instead, what's happening is some of the radical side of Orthodox Judaism, and even some that are not radical. But they really believe that Christians need to come under the teachings of Judaism because of the way they interpret the Bible. All right? And I don't fault those that are not radical that believe that way, just like we believe that they should recognize Yeshua as Messiah. As long as there is a mutual love and understanding and respect that you're not trying to force something on someone else. But the Noahide laws will be to force these laws upon the Christian, and the idolatry is what's so dangerous. And of course the courts of law and justice that determines what the interpretation of the laws are, which is done by the Talmudic belief. That's the danger. All right, but we get into the worst part. Let's go to the blue. Let's see. Let me just continue on. All the church is the new people of God. The Jews should not be presented as rejected or accursed by God, as if this followed from the Holy Scriptures. I agree. They should not be rejected or accursed. All should see to it that in cathetical work or in preaching of the Word of God, they do not teach anything that does not conform to the truth of the gospel and the Spirit of Christ. Now that's where I disagree with the Vatican on this. All should see to it then that in cathetical work or in preaching of the Word of God, they do not teach anything that does not conform to the truth of the gospel of the Spirit of Christ. Now, based on the Catholic Church, that's true, because that's what the Nostra Aetate did. The Catholic Church changed their doctrinal stance to say that everything that is taught in Judaism conforms to the truth of the gospel and the Spirit of Christ. Yeshua was not a Talmudist. Jesus Christ was not a Talmudist. He preached against the Talmud, the oral law. So to say that is to deny his words. Now, if this is what our Jewish brothers and sisters want to believe as the Talmud, by all means, they have a freedom of religion as well. In the United States anyway. And you would think that in Israel they do as well. Christians don't, but Jews do. All right? So I disagree with the statement, though. It is not conformed to the truth of the gospel. Just can't be. Now, we want to know, how do we get to the Nostra Aetate to begin with? My wife sent this to me. As somebody sent this to her, she just forwarded me to the letter there. Rabbis infiltrate. Paul Duman, Giza Vermes, Kurt Harubi of Notre Dame de Sion Femme were Hungarian Jews of egregious conflicted interests who converted to Catholicism. Became priests, laid the groundwork for Vatican II and Nostra Aetate, and once their work was done, converted back to Judaism. Kurt Harubi opted to continue his priestly ruse, which he is known, you don't get to see his face in here, he's known as Father Kurt Harubi, the Destroyer. Now the funny thing is, he's still in the Catholic Church, but this guy's got some pretty bad records. Now, below, the following passages from Giza Vermes' book, Providential Accidents, an autobiography. He is speaking of his fellow convert to Catholicism, FR, I guess, abbreviation for Father Kurt Harubi. While reading it, bear in mind Father Harubi's illustrious rabbinic ancestry. All right? Because this guy remained being a priest. Now, I don't know if he's still alive or not. I do know that Giza Vermes has already passed away. I think Giza was 88 when he passed away. Now, instead of reading to you from right here, well, I'll read from right here as well, but I'm going to take you and show you the excerpt because I actually pulled up the book to look at it myself. Kurt Harubi had been put in charge of the place as Paul's Duman's substitute, all right? Here's a copy of what the book looks like, Providential Accidents, Giza Vermes. And by the way, this man right here, Giza Vermes, also worked on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I had no idea of this at the time. But I've always argued that the Dead Sea Scrolls were manipulated and that the Vatican intentionally, who had these scrolls for 50 years before they were ever allowed to be made public, or at least I should say were not allowed to the general public for scrutiny and for scholastic research, were able to make sure that only certain fragments ever became public. And therefore, I always believed that certain fragments, when it comes to who Yeshua really was probably subverted and hidden. I had no idea that he was one of the scholars working on this and that he was actually Jewish. So naturally, as a Jewish believer, or as a Jewish man to begin with, he would work even the more vigorously to make sure it never saw the light of day. All right, insider, but a passing visitor through, though not a member of the order, Kurt Harubi had been put in charge of the place as Paul Demon's substitute during a summer vacation. This is they're over at Notre Dame in France at the time is where this is all taking place. As a capable handyman, he undertook the renovation and redecoration of interior of Sion Chapel, which is my time was used to be filled with awful traditional plaster statuary. All right, and believe me, I'm not into statues either, by no means, right? So I'm not here to say, what I'm about to say is not to defend statues and praying to statues. To me, that's idolatry, all right? But according to the 7 Noahide laws, they also say praying to Jesus is idolatry as well. So anyway, it says here, which in my time used to be filled with the awful traditional plaster statuary, Kurt decided to get rid of a lot. I can still see him in shirt sleeves, standing in the garden on a sunny afternoon. Dozens of angels, apostles, a Jesus with a Sacred Heart painted on the chest, several Virgin Marys wearing a white robe and blue cape were lined up on the ground against the wall of the chapel. No doubt incensed by the sight of those horrors, Kurt lifted a momentual sledgehammer and with a naughty twinkle in his eye smashed the statues one after the other into thousands of pieces. While doing so, he recited in Hebrew with old-fashioned traditional Ashkenazi pronunciation a conflated text of Psalm 96:5 and 135:15. Elohe Hagoim Elohim Masaya de Odam. The gods of the nations are idols, the works of man's hands. Is he burst them into pieces. Now that was statues. And I don't have much of an issue with statues. But in reality, it was also expressing his true sentiment when it comes to who Jesus Christ was, Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua HaMashiach. That's where the danger was. And these three men, Giza Vermes, Harubi, and of course Paul Denon, they were the ones that were instrumental in drafting the Nostra Aetate, or as it says in here, Vatican II. Which I have had Catholic people come to me and tell me, Steve, we are in Vatican II, not Vatican I. We are true Catholics that love Yeshua with all of our hearts. But our church was taken over by Jewish infiltrators. Now, I don't like to say I was taken over by Jewish infiltrators, but radical Talmudists, I would agree with. And don't kid yourself, Pope Francis, no doubt, he has Jewish ancestry. He has sent his cardinals and bishops when he was still yet a cardinal himself, or his bishops, as you say, maybe not cardinals, but the bishops of South America to train under the Noahide laws. Why do you think they made sure he became the next Pope of Rome? Think about it. And of course, the Nostra Aetate is what gave way, if you want to see where biblical scripture is fulfilled, it gave way for the Pope of Rome to come and to drink upon Mount Zion in the upper room, the supposed location where Yeshua had his Last Supper. As the scripture says here, see, for as you have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the nations drink continually. They're setting the precedent for the nations, for the Gentiles. After the Nostra Aetate was signed, it was Prime Minister Netanyahu that made way for halakha law with the chief rabbi of Mount Zion to hand over this location to the Vatican. And the Pope, not knowing what he was doing when he held the communion service in there, where men only participated in that communion service, as it so shows in here, Shotetem, masculine plural, al ha-kodeshi, they drank upon my holy mountain. Scripture was being fulfilled. And of course, the Pope could not have done it without evangelical support. Kenneth Copeland, who is pictured here beside the Pope, recently we were given an updated list of those well-known individuals who are 33rd degree Masons. Kenneth Copeland's name was attached to that list, along with many other names. Tony Palmer was the one that spearheaded this meeting with the Evangelical Society. He was very close to Kenneth Copeland, and he even says in the very video at the Kenneth Copeland's the Retreat of Evangelical Leaders that he came in the spirit of Elijah. They're constantly trying to make Scripture look as if it's fulfilling itself. Now, more recently, on May 16th, just a few days ago, the Times of Israel published this article. Stop Mel Gibson's new anti-Semitic movie, if needed, by erecting new laws. Are you serious? This is written by Moshe Mordechai ben Zayden. In the article, he states here about Mel Gibson. Apparently that time has come with his announcement that he is about to make a movie about a super-rich family by the name of Rothschild. He cleverly dropped the S and declares that they're not related to the Rothschilds. He could also have named them Kohans and claimed that they were not Jewish either by using a K rather than a C. Or put on a Muhammad and claimed that he is not a Muslim. Who does he think to fool? U.S. Democratic religious Boutier was immediately confronted when he used the word Pharisee despairingly. He was not aware of it being insulting for Jews, and after initially declaring that it can be used for hypocrites, he quickly learned he was wrong, apologized, and won't do it again. By the way, this U.S. Democrat, I think he's a mayor, is what he is right now, is going to be running for, or seeking to look to run for President of the United States. You'd be surprised to learn some things about him. What's interesting, though, is I know that there are some in religious circles, in evangelical circles, that are wanting to tout this man as the possible figure of the Antichrist. I don't think so. I think it's just going to be another distraction. He speaks 7 languages, very articulate in his ways, claims to be a Christian. I'm sure there were many that would challenge that question of his loyalty to Christ if you just look into his background. Kind of reminds me too of, Netanyahu. Like I said, they say that he's supposed to be, Netanyahu is some great guy, but yet he allows the gay parades in Jerusalem. He's the one that signed off on it. He's the one that signed off on the new abortion law in Israel that allows up to 3rd trimester. In other words, the woman could abort the baby all the way up to 9 months. And this is supposed to be the beliefs of Christianity? It sounds more like the beliefs of what Herod did to those that were little bitty children and that they were murdered. And now they even got laws they're wanting to pass that you can take the life of the child after it's born if the mother doesn't want it. What's going on here? By the way, do you know that the real target for this passing of that abortion law in Israel was to target the Arabic community, the Palestinians? How many Palestinians are Christians? Think about it. And then think about Herod. But how many Palestinians are Jews actually as well? About 50% of them are actually Jewish descent. So think then about Pharaoh as well when he was killing all the children trying to find Moses. Now, dealing with this Pharisee thing where this mayor used the word Pharisee, speaking of Jews as being like hypocrites, those that were hypocritical, and he apologized for it. But yet, according to the Jewish Virtual Library, the Pharisees, the most important of the three, were the Pharisees because they are the spiritual fathers of modern Judaism. Their main distinguishing characteristic was belief in an oral law that God gave to Moses. God never gave Moses no oral law. And if he did, it definitely is not what they wrote down. Because there's too much contradiction in it. All right? Now watch what else he says. You give Moses Sinai along with the Torah. That's funny. I guess Moses couldn't write after he wrote the Torah, right? The Torah, a written law, was akin to the U.S. Constitution in the sense that it set down a series of laws that were open to interpretation. The Pharisees believed that God also gave Moses the knowledge of what these laws meant and how they should be applied. This oral tradition is codified in the written down roughly 3 centuries later in what is known as the Talmud. So, they believe that the Pharisees are modern-day Judaism today. I would agree with that. Doesn't mean it's a good thing, by no means. But let me just show you, though, as well. Because one of the things that really began to wake me up were things, and I just put a couple of things in here for just as a reminder to you, what brought me down the road and what brought us down the road as a family to realize something was wrong. For me, one of the first things that woke me up was the crimes being done against the Syrians, the Christians in Syria, with this financing of the war, blaming Assad for gassing his people when he never gassed his own people. But then what happened next was my wife began to show me, and I have the book sitting here in my office on my bookshelf right here, where Jewish people were writing about the crimes that were being committed by militant Zionists. They want to call Christians militant Christians because they don't want Noahide laws. What about the militant Zionists that were against our own people? Okay? This right here. Zionists sacrificed Jews to the Holocaust, November 1st, 2013. I forget which book this is out of. The World Holocaust is a biblical term for burnt sacrifice. Why refer to genocide as a sacrifice? Because the Illuminati bankers deliberately sacrificed European Jews to create the State of Israel, the capital of the Rothschilds' occult New World Order. In this book, Perfidy, okay, that's where it's from. It's from the book Perfidy. 1961, author Ben-Nun describes, which he's a Jew. Ben-Nun was Jewish. He comes from Jewish parents, and his parents were survivors of the Holocaust. They didn't want him to write the book until they read his manuscript before he published it. After they read it, they said, "You must publish it," with tears in their eyes. Ben-Nun describes how the Nazis lacked the manpower to round up Jews and relied upon Zionists to do it. The Zionists betrayed their fellow Jews, yet reaped the moral and political capital from the Holocaust. The more Jews died, the stronger the moral case for Israel. The crucial information is not new, but they're trying to dump it down the memory hole. We need to be reminded. Okay? A good friend of mine in Israel wrote me when I began to expose. I was using one particular book. I don't know if I've got it right handy where I can reach out and read. By the way, here's Ben-Nun's book right here, just so you can see it. Perfidy. Many books written by Jewish authors. But there's another one, Holocaust Survivors Accused. That was the other book I was thinking about, where the rabbis talk about how the Hungarian Jews, 1 million Hungarian Jews, could have been saved. But the Zionist leaders in Switzerland refused to give the $3 apiece for those Jews that they could have saved. Instead, they spent $1,000 apiece only for the elite Zionists to be brought out. Well, thank God they at least saved those. But they spent $1.7 million, which a little bit more money put with that could have got the entire lot of 800,000 Jews that would have been spared from the Holocaust. But if you read these books, you'll find out why. There was a reason behind it. They needed the Holocaust to justify the creation of the State of Israel. No, we didn't need the Holocaust for that. The Ottoman Empire was already allowing Jewish families to purchase land. since the mid-1800s. I think what it was is they didn't want the Sephardic Jews to create the state by diplomatic means. And I think that's where the real issue comes to. I'm kind of winding down here. I'm about out of voice anyway. I want to play for you though, just so you can see the crimes that are done against others, but are done by our own people. This here is from Eran Efrati, an interview I just found recently here on YouTube. He's a former IDF soldier. His father is the, I don't know if he still is the chief of police of Jerusalem or not, but his father is chief of police of Jerusalem. Iran has to live in hiding because of his outspoken views of what really goes on. Listen to what he says here.
I realized that my job is actually to maintain an apartheid system. Very early on, I understood that the rights that the Jewish settlers have are not the rights that the Palestinians have. I understood that I cannot touch a Jewish settler if he is attacking a Palestinian. The best I can do is call a local police department to come handle it, like I would do at home in Jerusalem. So these Jewish settlers that live in Hebron are living under the same rights that I live in Jerusalem, but a Palestinian next to them, next house over, next building over, sometimes next apartment over, lives under my rule, my military rule. And I can do whatever I want with him. I can take his home as a temporary base for a few hours, to a few days, to a few weeks. I can decide that I'm arresting the people of the house and tying them up to the fence of my base. If you will get an order to demolish their home or just lock their front door and don't let them out into the street their house is on, a street that only Jewish settlers can walk on and Palestinians cannot. So they have to walk through windows to yards, into the other side, into the castle of Hebron. I think realizing all of that in a very, very early stage in my service helped me understood that someone was lying to me along the way. I didn't feel like I'm protecting anyone. I didn't feel like I'm helping anyone feeling more safe. I feel like I'm terrorizing people. I feel like for the first time in my life, the boundaries between good and bad that I learned as a kid, and obviously I learned that I'm on the good side, was broken. I felt like I am the terrorist. And my job was literally to scare people so they cannot think about acting against the Israeli settlers or the Israeli military. That was actually our defining mission, to make sure that to instill fear in the hearts of Palestinians in Hebron. And that's exactly what we did.
Imagine that. And Eran Efrati
I realized
is one of many soldiers that have come out and testified to these things. When I lived in Jerusalem back in 2004, I had a roommate that lived with me in a house. We had a private house there up in Givat Hamivitar, which is in northern Jerusalem, close to Hebrew University. And he as well told me, shared with me of the atrocities that soldiers would do, target practice on Palestinians. And he confessed to me that he'd killed many Palestinians as an Israeli soldier. Now, I don't think that all Israeli soldiers participate in these type things. But the thing is, what you hear from Eran Efrati is nothing unusual. All right, now, but what's sad is if we look at Daniel chapter 11, and I've brought this prophecy out many times to you guys in the past, and I share with you that as it says in Hebrew, Uvanei Pa'atzi Amcha, all right, and the sons of the violent of your people. The angel Gabriel is speaking to Daniel, and he says to him, Uvanei Pa'atzi Amcha, the sons of the violent of your people, okay, Inasu lahamid hazon, they shall lift themselves up to try to establish the vision, but of course it goes on to say, but they shall stumble. Now, oddly enough, we can see this amongst leaders. We see this amongst soldiers that are being forced into doing these things, the violence. But yet, in the Talmud, and in the ideology of many radical Talmudists, They put that blame on Yeshua and say that Yeshua was a militant. In fact, they translate the verse instead of paatsi as violent, they translate it right here as vulgar. Okay? Let me just read to you what they say. All right, this is in the Mishnah, which is part of the Talmud, Sefer Shoftim under Melachim or Melachamot, which is the laws of kings and their wars. If he did not succeed to this degree or was killed, he surely is not the Redeemer promised by the Torah. So their opinion is that Yeshua is not the Redeemer that's promised by the Torah, right? All right, so that's their opinion there. And they say, what's printed here in the yellow at the bottom, they say, Jesus of Nazareth, who aspired to be the Mashiach, was executed by the court, was also alluded to in Daniel's prophecies as 11:14 states, the vulgar among your people shall exalt themselves and attempt to fulfill the vision, but they shall stumble. So they put the blame of the fulfillment of Daniel 11:14 at the feet of Yeshua. Now some Talmudic apologists out there would try to say to people, well, you read it in English, it's not translated very well, and you don't understand Hebrew, so they brush it off that you're anti-Semitic because you quote something from the Talmud of an English translation. Well, this is from the Chabad.org, and they don't translate it inaccurately. Now, I had to insert the actual Hebrew part from the Talmud itself, from Rambam, from Rambam's writing there, and he does say, clearly as you can see, Yeshua HaNazarit, all right? Yeshua HaNazarit, Shadiyama, Sheyachaya, Mashiach, all right? So he's saying there, Jesus of Nazareth, who aspired to be the Messiah. So it's about Jesus Christ of Nazareth. It's not about some other Yeshua, as sometimes Tovia Singer has taken up the argument and says, well, Jesus, we could argue that he's not in there because there's other people with the same name Yeshua before, la-da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, in Rambam's writing, it's quite plain, frank, and simple. He says, Yeshua HaNazarit, Jesus the Nazarite, or Jesus of Nazareth. So there's no way of mistaking it. So the blame is put on him. And again, Jewish-Christian relations, Rambam's words. This is Jewish-Christian relations saying this. Even Jesus the Christian, who thought he was the Messiah, was the subject of a prophecy in the book of Daniel, 11:14. Also, the renegades of your people will exalt themselves to fulfill the vision, but they will stumble. Could there be a greater stumbling block than this Jesus? For all the prophets spoke of Messiah who will redeem and save Israel, who will gather all its exiles, and who will strengthen them in the fulfillment of the Torah's commandments. While he, Jesus, caused Israel to be killed by the sword, their remnants to be dispersed and humiliated, the Torah to be switched for something else, and most of the world to worship a God other than the God of Israel. But the thoughts of God cannot be fathomed by human minds, for our ways are not like his, our thoughts are not like his. All these activities of Jesus, the Christian, the Ishmaelite, whom came after him, are all for the purpose of paving the way of the true King Messiah. Totally rejecting the fact that as the children of Israel, we went into exile because of our own sins, not because of Yeshua. We had rejected the Messiah. And of course, their argument is that he died. Well, the funny thing is now they write that there's two Messiahs. Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, and the Mashiach ben Yosef is to die. Because why? According to Daniel's prophecy, Daniel chapter 9, we find out, when you get down around verse 24 or so, that there is a Mashiach Negid, an anointed prince that is to come, the Messiah prince, and that he is to be cut off. All right? So they don't want to take you to that side because they would identify that Yeshua was the Messiah. There are many. It was written in the days before the temple was ever destroyed. The rabbis were in belief that the Messiah had to come before the destruction of the second temple. They don't want to tell you that either. But that was written by rabbis of that day. Because the fact that their ideology didn't work out. I won't go into that. Anyway, Shimon Peres, as it states here in this article here, was no peacemaker. I'll never forget the sight of the pouring blood and burning bodies at Cana. Perez said the massacre came as a bitter surprise. It was a lie. The UN had repeatedly told Israel the camp was packed with refugees. Robert Fisk wrote this article here on Wednesday, the 28th September 2016. So the violent is what we see happening today. All the wars in the Middle East, although being fought by Americans, NATO members as well, but in many cases, we have entered into these wars as a result of 9/11. That's why they want to pass the anti-Semitic law that silences you about speaking about 9/11, because they don't want to go to the truth of it. They don't want you to know all the different radical Jews that were involved in the evidence being covered up, because then you might know the truth. The false information about Iraq given by Prime Minister Netanyahu at the time that helped contribute to our invasion of Iraq, and subsequently the wars that continue to rage on in the Middle East, and even now to push for the war with Iran. So where is the violent among our people? Jeremiah chapter 11 states this, verse 9, "And the Lord said unto me, a conspiracy is found among the men of Judah and among the inhabitants of Jerusalem. They are turned back to the iniquities of their fathers, who refuse to hear my words, and they are gone after other gods to serve them." Well, you're going to blame that on Yeshua too? You know, so there's no wonder why Yeshua says in Matthew 23, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Because you build the tombs of the prophets and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous, and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Wherefore you be witnesses unto yourselves, that you are the children of them which killed the prophets. Fill you up the measure of your fathers. You serpents, you generation of vipers, how can you escape the damnation of hell?" Now when we read this in Matthew 23, you might think, especially when we get down to the end of chapter 23, and Yeshua says, "Oh Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I would have hovered you as a hen would her own brood, but you would not. Your house is left unto you desolate until you say, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord." You would think that Yeshua is implying that all the Pharisees and scribes were hypocrites, but he was not. Because that's what doesn't make sense about the whole chapter. He speaks about the Pharisees and Sadducees as a bunch of vipers and snakes. But you need the Hebrew Matthew, the very book that was preserved by the Jewish community, Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew. You need this book here to help see something that we're missing in the Greek translation. Because in verse 34, right after he says, serpents, seed of vipers, how will you escape the judgment of Gehenna? He says, right there, see? Verse 34, he says, though, at that time, Jesus said to the crowds of Jews, see? Ba'at hahi amar Yeshua le'abarot ha'yudim. See? Ha-Yehudim. He said to the crowd of Jews, "Therefore, behold, I am sending you prophets and sages and scribes. Some of them you will kill, some of them you will afflict in your synagogues, and you will pursue them from city to city." Then he goes into that, how often I would have hovered you as a hen with her own brood. Why? Yeshua knew that there was a remnant there. Even though there was a reptilian race that, as I did in the video just the other day here on Israeli News Live, I showed you clearly how a race had got mixed in there that are not even real Jews. Ezra himself tells you in the book of Ezra that the Levites and the priests were chief in the sin of mingling the holy seed with that of the people of the lands. And then he names it. Not the Persians, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites. The very people that when God had commanded Joshua to go into the land and to destroy those nations because they had intermingled their seed with the Nephilim, and it brought those demonic beings into this realm, and God said to the children of Israel, Clean it off. While they were in Babylon during that 70 years, they married in amongst those same groups, those same hybrid beings. And the priests and the Levites were chief in that sin. And this was brought into Israel. And then we get news like this from Breaking Israel News. Is Netanyahu the Messiah from the house of Joseph? What? Can you believe this? May 28th, 2018, this was written. Is he the Messiah from the house of Joseph? All right? Let me quote to you what the article says. It is very clear we see in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that he is fulfilling his destiny as Moshiach ben Yosef. That is to say, the reincarnation of Jonathan. The name Netanyahu is composed of the same letters as the name of Jonathan. It is also significant that the Prime Minister's older brother, who was killed fighting haters of Israel, was named Jonathan. If you go down further in the article, just as Jonathan fought the Amalekites before David, the end of days, it will be the function of the Mashiach ben Yosef, or reincarnation of Jonathan, to battle Amalek before Mashiach ben David. Be looking for a Messiah. And he's already come and gone and you didn't know it. But see, that's the difference. The true believers in Yeshua today, regardless of how even the radical Talmudists might think, we have a love for our Jewish brothers and sisters. We are wanting for them to see what God has been merciful for us to see. And so we also are long-suffering. And then we continue on with this idea of the two messiahs that are coming. The Times of Israel, written by Yitzhak Ginsburg. On a deeper level, this reflects two different stages of redemption, or it's two different goals. The first stage, the goal is Mashiach ben, the son of Joseph, the snake stage. Because, you know, some of you might have problems that I just quoted up there where Yeshua says that they are a generation of vipers. And some might say, well, that's anti-Semitic. Well, how can it be anti-Semitic when Yitzhak Ginsburg is writing Mashiach, the son of Joseph, snake stage, while the second stage is the Messiah, the son of David, the scorpion stage. First, the snake Messiah turns to the nation of Israel. Yeshua said, your generation of vipers. Awakens their hearts to serve God, warms them with enthusiasm to strive for the redemptive destiny, the fulfillment of full life of Torah, war on the world, evil, and the building of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Later, Scorpion Messiah turns with a cool-headed equilibrium to the 70 nations of the world in order to bring them close to the service of God. If you think the Talmud is to bring me closer to the service of God, I'll never have nothing to do with it. Period. But that's where it's coming to. Oh, what do you know? I did put Ezra in here. Ezra chapter 9. In verse 1, the people of Israel and the priests of the Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the lands, doing according to the abominations. Even the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, and the Egyptians, and the Amorites. Even the Egyptians worship the serpent god. Right? For they have taken of the daughters for themselves and for their sons, so the holy seed have mingled themselves with the peoples of the lands. Yea, the hand of the princes and rulers hath been first in this faithlessness. What do you know? Even the rulers. It's no strange thing that the rulers of today in Israel and the Levites and the priests are doing the same thing today then. Very sad. And as I brought out to you in the broadcast the other day, God had already warned us not to do these sexual type of sins. How do they do it? Thou shalt not give any of thy seed to set them apart to Molech, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. And he puts that right in Leviticus chapter 18, a chapter that is devoted to sexual sins. Thou shalt not approach unto a woman to uncover her nakedness. Thou shalt not lie carnally with thy neighbor's wife. Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. Thou shalt not lie with any beast to defile thyself therewith. And in the middle of it, thou shalt not give any of thy seed to set them apart to Molech. You see, though, they didn't have to do it the sorcery way when they went down into Persia, modern-day Iran, under the king of Babylon. Those people already mixed the seed. It's just the leaders of our people continued to mix that seed, as the scripture so says. Jeremiah chapter 3 says, Israel had committed adultery. I'd put her away and given her a bill of divorcement. That yet treacherous Judah, her sister, feared not, but she also went and played the harlot. Go down to verse 10. And yet for all this, her treacherous sister Judah hath not returned unto me with her whole heart, but vainly saith the Lord. And yet we get blamed for being anti-Semitic. We're not anti-Semitic. We don't want any violence towards Jewish people. But we do want freedom of religion. We want to be able to worship the God of our fathers the way we see fit. And if we believe that Yeshua is Messiah, we want to have that right as well, and not being forced to have Noahide laws in our Constitution, which is unconstitutional. And I might remind you as well how this all happened. In Numbers chapter 13, we are not able to go up against the people. These were the spies that came back with Caleb and Joshua. Out of the 10, 8 of them said that they couldn't go up against them. We couldn't possess the land. And he goes on to say, and they spread an evil report of the land which they had spied out unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have passed to spy it out is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. All the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came of the Nephilim, and were in our own sight as grasshoppers, so were we in their sight. So the Nephilim, those that don't believe the Nephilim were after the flood, in Hebrew, Moses clearly said, Et ha-Nephilim b'nei Anak, the sons of Anak. Not Enoch, not E-N-O-C-H. Please listen, because no matter how many times I say this, people still keep saying, would you say Enoch was with Nephilim? No, Anak, A-N-A-K, Anak, okay? But Anak was from the Nephilim. Now, these rabbis that put in the vowels around the 6th or 7th century there, this is where I have an argument with them. Moses spelled Nephilim over here with an extra yod. When he got over here, he took the yod out. Why? Because Anak, A-N-A-K, comes from the fallen angels themselves. And his children were Nephilim. So, and of course we know the Perizzite, the Ammonite, the Hittite, all of those were those people that were there. As we saw back earlier, as I showed you, the chief priest and the rulers of the people had mixed in with those people. So they're already, their children are already Nephilim, and now the Holy Seed is being mixed with Nephilim once again. No wonder why Yeshua, you see, Yeshua knew, he had the ability of knowing which ones were snakes, reptilian race, which ones were Nephilim. He knew which ones they were. And the fact that he says they're Nephilim even speaks greater because he goes to the very source of their father. Fascinating. Also, Matthew chapter 12. I thought I was getting close to the end here, guys. If Satan cast out another Satan, there will be his division. This is from, by the way, from the Hebrew Matthew here. There will be division among them. How will his kingdom stand? If I cast out demon by Beelzebub, why do your sons not cast them out? Therefore they will be your judges. See, Yeshua was showing that the reason why the certain groups of these Pharisees could not cast out devils is because their father was the devil. And they would actually create a division of their own kingdom and it wouldn't stand. I think it's pretty smart. And of course, in the book of the Assumption of Moses, Moses also speaks about this. It's a book that I can't say it should be part of the canon or not. I have no idea. It's just a historical document. I think from the 5th century is the oldest version they have of this. It says, wherefore it hath been said, they shall turn aside from the righteousness and approach iniquity. They shall defile with pollutions the house of their worship. And because they shall prostitute themselves with strange gods. So even though it's not a canonical book, Moses is clearly showing you, if this book is really written by him, that they're going to prostitute themselves with strange gods. Nephilim, right? For they shall not follow the truth of God, but some shall pollute the altar with the very gifts which they offer to the Lord. What do you know? Who are not priests, but slaves and sons of slaves. In other words, the priests and the Levites were chief in that sin during the times of the Babylonian captivity. They had mixed the holy seed, and so therefore their children were slaves and sons of slaves. And many in those times shall have respect and desirable persons, and receive gifts, and pervert judgment on receiving presents. On this account, the colony of the borders of their habitation shall be filled with the lawless deeds and iniquities. That's exactly what happened to Israel years later. Unbelievable. I'm out of voice. Listen, guys, if you've been able to stay here to the end, I spoke about it at the beginning. We are in a major battle. We are taking precautions. That's what we're doing. If you've ever stood with this ministry and you want to stand with this ministry, we need your help now. Support this ministry. If you want to specifically support with my wife as well, because we are working on getting legal counsel as we move forward to make sure that everything is done correctly, you can specifically send a love offering by mail. Now you can donate online if you want. You can go to our website, israelinewslive.org. But you can send by mail. I'll have it. It's right here on the bottom of your screen now. My wife's ID is still in her maiden name. Even though her name is actually Jana Ben-Nun, Jana Sutoova is how her driver's license is. It's the way our bank account is. Make it out to her specifically because you're wanting to help with her what we're trying to do to deal with the fight and the battle we're dealing with in the background. So, and it's spelled, as you can see, Jana, J-A-N-A, Sutoova, S-U-T-O-O-V-A. You can also send donations to help this work and this ministry. If you want to do DeNoon Institute, you can, or you can put it in my name as well, Stephen Ben-Nun. We really appreciate your help in doing this and your support to get the truth out. That's our sole objective, is to tell you the truth. And again, in closing, I say, we do not encourage any violence against our Jewish brothers and sisters, or any faith or religion for that matter. We may have opposing views, but we believe in supporting in the rights of free speech in the United States given to us by the Constitution of the United States, and our amendments, our First, our Second Amendment rights. We believe in all the amendments. Well, I may disagree with some of the amendments, granted, like anybody else would, but it's still in the Constitution, and we have to uphold what our Constitution has. But the last thing we want to do is to see laws that are added in the United States Constitution that violates the very founding principles that this nation was built upon. Stand with us. And let's fight this together. Contact your congressmen, your senators. Let them know that you're educating yourself on this. And don't just take our word. Do your own research. And we will continue to do what we can to bring everything to you so that you will know what the truth really is. Our address is below, and this will be made available on DVD in the very near future. Give me a little time to prepare it, and we'll give you the details on how you can order this. And this will not be done for monetizing, making money. That's not our purpose. We are clearly seeing the day is rapidly approaching. They're going to stop freedom of speech in this nation. We want to put in your hands what we can so you know what's going on. I'm Steve Ben-Nun with Israeli News Live. Shalom, and truly a world of Ein Shalom. There is no peace. Good day.